Welcome into Greg Ducharme Golf. I am Greg Ducharme, and we have a fun one for you today. This has to do with the USGA and the ball rollback. Now, this week, the USGA announced that the ball rollback will be pushed to 2030. It used to be, as of last year in 2028, they were going to implement this rule across professional tours, the elite amateur game perhaps, and then 2 years later in 2030, they were going to implement this rule for everybody. But this week, the USGA announced that now that has been pushed back and everybody will deal with the new rollback rules in 2030. What is the rollback? Well, first and foremost, as the USGA says, this is what they call ODS, official distance standards. And basically what happens is when you are trying to make equipment, let's say you're a Titleist, you're an OEM, you make equipment and the USGA approves it, and it will be, that new equipment will be added to the conforming list. Well, the conforming list is based on rules and regulations that the USGA puts forth. Now, when it comes to the golf ball, the way that the ODS is measured is there are certain launch conditions that they basically will set up a robot that will hit the ball under certain launch conditions. And in order for the ball to be conforming, it can only go a certain distance. They have now changed that distance standard, and they've changed the launch conditions and brought back the distance that the ball can go, essentially rolling back the golf ball. So now this led to a lot of questions this week at the U.S. Open, some of which I want to get into because I heard some of these quotes from the USGA CEO Mike Whan, and some of them raised some concerns to me, made me a little bit curious. So here's the first one. Mike Whan, again, the CEO of the USGA, he was asked about the distance that the ball was going. He was asked about the process of altering these rollback specifications, and he answered a question with this. I'll be honest with you. My most recent conversations with PGA Tour leadership and DP World Tour leadership were starting with distance increasing. We don't want the game to become even further one-dimensional. Okay, that really stood out to me. Even further one-dimensional. So that implies, of course, that the game is one-dimensional. Now, as Mike Whan also said, the tours and the USGA, their conversations are starting with the ball is going farther. I might alter that and say players are hitting the ball farther. I think that's a really important component here. But I was really kind of taken aback by this statement that they don't want the game to become even more one-dimensional, which again implies that it is one-dimensional. So I decided to take a look at the last 5 U.S. Opens and look at every player that finished in the top 10 of these 5 U.S. Opens. And I wanted to see, is the game one-dimensional? So, but before I share that with you, I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on the game of golf and the distance that the ball goes? Is the ball going too far? Do we need a rollback in the game of golf? Throw your questions, throw your comments in the comment section. I'll reply to all of them. I've really enjoyed all the comments that you've left on my previous videos and really enjoyed that. By the way, if you're interested in this type of content, well-researched content, go ahead and hit that subscribe button because this is the kind of stuff that will be coming out each and every week. So now let's get into these leaderboards. The 2025 U.S. Open. You can see this top 10 here. You can see the distance that the players hit the ball and their best strokes gained statistic. This is every player, again, who finished in the top 10. So when you look at that distance statistic, there are 2 ways to measure distance. One is driving distance, which is typically measured on 2 tee shots. They try to find one that's into the wind or downwind, maybe one that's uphill, maybe one that's downhill. But this statistic that you see here is called driving distance all drives. So I look at every tee shot that the players hit the ball. What is their distance across all of those? And I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. So J.J. Spawn was first in the tournament. He won the 2025 U.S. Open. This was at Oakmont. He was 51st in driving distance, all drives. There were a couple of players in this field who they hit the ball a long way, like Cameron Young. He finished at 3 over. He was averaged 305.9 all drives, which was sixth in the field. John Rahm averaged 306.2. That was fifth in the field. But ultimately, when you look at 2025, there were only 2 players out of the 11 top 10 finishers who averaged over 300 yards. And if you look at how many players finished top 20 in driving distance, only 4 out of the 11. In fact, I found this to be really interesting. 0 of the 11 players in this 2025 U.S. Open had their best statistic come from strokes gained off the tee. Yet there were 5 whose best area was approach play. There were 2 whose best area was short game. There were 4 whose best area was putting. I found that to be rather interesting. So now let's take a look at the 2024 U.S. Open. This was contested at Pinehurst in 2024. So now you look at this leaderboard, and now this looks very different. You see Bryson DeChambeau winning. Of course, we know about the driving distance Bryson DeChambeau possesses. You see Rory McIlroy in second. We know about the driving distance he possesses. Now look at these distance numbers. 318.9 for all drives for Bryson DeChambeau. It led the field. Rory McIlroy was sixth at 308.4. And you see a number of players averaging over 300 yards here at Pinehurst. So, in fact, there were 4 players of the 11 top 10 finishers who average over 300 yards. Top 20 in driving distance, 4 players out of the 11. And I love this one. I love when you look at their best stats in 2024. 3 players' best stat was strokes gained off the tee. 3 players' best stat was strokes gained approach the green. 2 players' best stat was strokes gained around the green. And 3 players' best stat was strokes gained putting. I know Bryson won and hits it a long way. That's going to get a lot of attention. But this 2024 U.S. Open at Pinehurst was as balanced as you can get. So now let's take a look at 2023. Now this one might catch your attention, so I need you to bear with me here. There you see Wyndham Clark wins at 10 under par, and he beats Rory McIlroy by a shot. Wyndham Clark was a little longer than Rory. He was second in the field at 317. Rory McIlroy was fourth in the field at 315. But look at this. 9 out of the 13 players in the top 10 averaged over 300 yards for all their drives. There were 6 top 10 finishers who also finished top 20 in driving distance. And now we see a really big discrepancy here. Strokes gained off the tee. 6 players favored strokes gained off the tee, meaning that was their best statistic. Only 2 players' best statistic was strokes gained approach the green. 2 players were strokes gained around the green, and 3 players' best statistic was strokes gained putting. So LACC in 2023 was pretty good for the Bombers. Now, let's go back 1 year to 2022. This was fascinating to me. Now, in 2022, you see Matt Fitzpatrick wins. This, by the way, is at the Country Club in Brookline, Massachusetts. Matt Fitzpatrick wins at 6 under par. His average driving distance is 292.4 for all of his drives. That was 20th. His best stat was strokes gained around the green. Scotty Scheffler and Will Zalatoris finished second. 290.6 for Scotty Scheffler. That was 22nd. His best stat, no surprise, was strokes gained approach the green. And Will Zalatoris averaged 284.0, which was 48th in the field. And to my surprise, his best strokes gained category was putting. So to summarize this, in 2022, 0 players averaged over 300 yards, and 2 players of the 11 top 10 finishers, 2 players finished top 20 in driving distance. 0 players led their own game with off the tee play. 5 players' best statistical area was strokes gained approach. 3 players for both putting and around the green. Their best area was in one of those 2 categories. So again, not very balanced, but it didn't favor distance off the tee. Now, last one here that I looked into was 2021. 2021 U.S. Open was held at Pinehurst. And as you can see here, it was won by Jon Rahm. Again, at 6 under par. Jon Rahm averaged 316.8 off the tee. He was 8th in driving distance. They were hitting it a long way that week. His best statistical area was strokes gained approach, however. Louis Oosthuizen came in second at 5 under. 303.6 was his average driving distance, which was 33rd in the field. His best statistical area was putting. When you look at the summary here of 2021, 10 out of the 12 top 10 finishers averaged over 300 yards. 5 out of 12 top 10 finishers finished top 20 in driving distance. But still, only 2 players had their best strokes gained category be off the tee. 5 approaching the green, 3 around the green, and 2 putting. So I find this to be rather fascinating, and it tells and highlights a very important point. When you look back through these U.S. Opens, something jumps out to me, and that's the course setup. We play Open Championships on different courses every single year. And the way that the course is set up dictates how players play it, how far they hit the ball, and also what area of the game is most important. And I would say, for the most part, this is a pretty balanced outcome, pretty balanced approach. Every U.S. Open, you have a couple guys in there who succeed with putting. Every once in a while, every U.S. Open has a couple of guys who really perform well around the greens, and that carries them to success. And it's very obvious that approaching the green carries a lot of guys to success through these U.S. Opens, and sometimes off the tee is favored. You look at 2023 at LACC, and you have 9 players average over 300 yards, where there are 0 in 2022. No, that's not an equipment bump. 2022 is before 2023. You might think, well, players got longer from 2022 to 2003. It's not the case, because again, in 2021, 10 players in the top 10 of the U.S. Open were over 300 yards. So starting from 2021 and working more recent, you have 10 players over 300 yards in 21, 0 in 22, 9 in 23, 4 in 24, and 2 last year in 2025. The thing that guides distance is course setup more than anything else, because players in today's game look at data. They look at the same statistics, probably much more in-depth statistics than what I look at, and they determine what is going to work best for their game on a given golf course, and they make their decisions based on data. But the data is based on the setup of the golf course. Strokes gained, you've heard this before, it favors distance. Is that the case if on the edges of fairways is water and you take a penalty shot if you miss a fairway? No, that would really influence the importance of accuracy. And the strokes gained data would change based on the penalty that exists when you miss a fairway. So course setup is the number one thing when it comes to driving distance. And I also find it interesting this year in the 2026 U.S. Open, which is going on right now, so I don't have a top 10 and I don't have stats for it yet. But heading into this U.S. Open in 2018, the USGA did not lengthen the golf course at all. In fact, 2026, 2018, at Shinnecock Hills, played exactly the same distance, 7,440 yards. But the change that they did make is the fairways were about 15 yards wider in 2026 compared to 2018. In 2023 at LACC, they didn't narrow the fairways at all. The 18th fairway was 80 yards wide. Do you know what happens when you do that? Players are going to hit the ball farther, because all of a sudden the data says distance is the advantage. But that's not the case at the Country Club. That's not the case at Oakmont. Bryson DeChambeau won the U.S. Open at Winged Foot in 2020, Pinehurst in 2024. He missed the cut at the U.S. Open in 2025 at Oakmont, and he missed the cut in 2026 at Shinnecock. My point is, There's a lot more to the game of golf than just distance. In fact, ahead of this year's U.S. Open, Rory McIlroy was asked about why his U.S. Open record has changed and improved so much. And this is what he had to say. Again, working on the things that you need to do well to excel at these, which is U.S. Opens, which is flighting the ball, hitting your numbers, wedge play, short game, putting, which is all the stuff that I feel like I've improved over the last few years. So when you see Rory McIlroy's name on these recent top 10s, these recent leaderboards in U.S. Opens, because he has finished in the top 10 in every year since Shinnecock Hills, with the exception of Oakmont. So 2019, 2020, 2021, 22, 23, and 24, he finished top 10 in all those U.S. Opens and probably should have won too. And it's easy to think, well, he hits the ball a long way. Distance is taking over the game. Yet he says it's basically everything except distance. And he doesn't even mention accuracy. It's flighting the ball. I'll read it again. I'll show you the quote again. There's no mention of driver here. It's flighting the ball, hitting your numbers, wedge play, short game, putting, which is all the stuff I feel like I've improved in the last few years. Okay, this is not a game of distance. While distance is important, it is certainly not one-dimensional. It is far from one-dimensional. In fact, in all of these U.S. Opens that we just looked at, there is only one player, only one top 10 finisher in these 5 U.S. Opens who led the field in driving distance. Only one. Bryson DeChambeau in 2024, and he won. The leader in driving distance in 2021, 2022, 2023, 2025, the leader did not finish in the top 10 in driving distance. It is just simply, plain and simple, it is not a one-dimensional game. Now, here's the next question. There's one other thing I wanted to show you. In case you don't like the U.S. Opens, if you think that's a little too small, and I use the U.S. Open leaderboards because the USGA runs the U.S. Opens, and the USGA is governing the game and governing the distance in the game. Okay, so they're looking at primarily, in theory, their own championships. I don't know if that's the case, but I figured it was a good place to start, kind of right in their own backyard, if you will. But in case you're wondering about the rest of the game, when we're not playing in U.S. Opens, how do these guys fare? So I looked at the official World Golf Rankings, the top 10 players in the official World Golf Rankings, and where they rank in distance. So here's the top 10 in OWGR, and just like the other charts for U.S. Opens, we have their driving distance, although this is not all drives. This is just driving distance. A little more general, more commonly used. I figured it was best to use here. You'll notice Rory McIlroy has an asterisk next to his rank, and so does Jon Rahm. That's because they don't have enough events to qualify. For Jon Rahm, who plays on LIV, I used his PGA Tour driving distance number. That is only including the performance at the Masters and the PGA, so it is very skewed. Bear that in mind. But what we do see here is 9 out of the top 10 players in the world average over 300 yards. But only 4 out of the top 10 players in the world are in the top 50 in driving distance. And again, looking at their best stats, you have 2 players. Their best statistical category in 2026 is strokes gained off the tee. 4 players, best strokes gained off the tee area is approaching the green. 3 players, it's strokes gained around the green. 1 player, it's strokes gained putting. Russell Henley's a big deal to me, sitting there at number 5 in the official World Golf Rankings. Again, this is before the U.S. Open, and he is 146th on tour in driving distance. So while 4 players of these top 10 are inside the top 50 in driving distance on the PGA Tour, there are at the same time 3 players who are 100th or worse in driving distance. a hundredth or worse. Again, this all goes to the same point. This is not a one-dimensional game. And as a result, the question is, what do we do about it? Do you think the game of golf is one-dimensional? Let me know in the comments below. But time to move on. Now I want to move on to the PGA Tour. What does the PGA Tour itself do about this? Because it's very clear to me that the USGA is looking at US Open data. They're looking at Open Championship data with the R&A as well. And they're looking at PGA Tour data. And these are the things that are driving the discussions. But does the PGA Tour, who runs upwards of 50 tournaments, at least 35 tournaments a year, and if you count all their other tours, I mean, they are running hundreds of tournaments in a year. Does the PGA Tour want to make this change? Well, I don't know. But is that a really important aspect in this whole discussion? Yes. In fact, listen to what Mike Whan said ahead of the U.S. Open. And I'll redo this quote. One day I will figure out how to play video within my videos, and we can play the quote so you don't have to hear me read it. But for now, I was able to find these transcripts, and I'll just show you what the transcript says and read it for you. So Mike Whan, the CEO of the USGA, said, when we faced a crossroads a couple of years ago that MLRs, which are model local rules, weren't something that was going to be implemented. At the time, we were under the impression that model local rules were not something to be implemented in the tour. So we had to do something as an across-the-board change. He went on to say, we knew when we crossed that road, that if we were going to do an across-the-board change, it could only be as far as it could be to have no impact on the recreational game. I've used this term with Kevin a lot. I view the ODS, official distance standard, ball change as a small, digestible bite that the industry can handle. It would be small. It's not horrific. There's a couple of things in there that are really important to me. First and foremost, model local rule is something that the USGA will make for other organizations or other golf courses. It will create a model local rule, and you have the choice to implement it. For instance, we'll create a model local rule on the PGA Tour that they're going to use a different golf ball and play by different equipment standards. That was proposed to the PGA Tour. And as Mike Whan just told you, the Tour said no. If you create a model local rule for changing the distance that PGA Tour players hit the ball, we're not going to use it. So the USGA said, okay, well, that would be ineffective. So I guess we'll just change it for everybody. But now we also want to make sure that it doesn't impact you, the recreational player. It has to have as little impact on the recreational player as possible, but we have to do something to control these guys on the PGA Tour that hit the ball so far, even though they don't want to change the distance that the ball goes for them. They don't feel like it's a problem. We do, so we're going to change the game for everybody. The logic there baffles me. It blows my mind. So what is the PGA Tour thinking on this? Under new leadership, the CEO of the PGA Tour a couple weeks ago released a fascinating survey to its players, which fortunately we were able to get. Golf Week obtained it. Golf Digest obtained it. A number of media outlets obtained it and shared it. And I found this to be fascinating. Look at these questions that the PGA Tour asked its members, its players. Now, we don't have the results for this yet, and I would love to see the results. We don't have them yet. But listen to this. In your opinion, how effective has the USGA and R&A's rulemaking process efforts been in responding to the needs of the professional game? Effective, ineffective, or I'm not sure, need more information. The PGA Tour asked its players that. They also asked, should the PGA Tour have its own rulemaking process for both play and equipment rules, currently governed by the USGA and R&A? Yes. Yes, but only in specific areas, including this issue, and no. And while there were a number of questions in this survey, I'm going to spare you and just read one more. Based on what you know of this rule and its impact on driving distance, should the PGA Tour implement this rule? Fascinating stuff there, because it highlights a couple of things. One, the PGA Tour is considering creating their own rules and not listening to the USGA. The USGA rolls the ball back in 2030. PGA Tour doesn't. Now, it was very clear from the press conference that the USGA gave at this year's U.S. Open that the USGA and the PGA Tour are talking, and they want to get this resolved. But if the results of this survey come back and the players say, no, distance is not a problem, if the players say, yes, the PGA Tour should have its own rulemaking rules, its own rulemaking process, and the USGA and R&A have been ineffective in creating rules for the professional game, well, now all of a sudden there's a real problem for the USGA. And the question becomes, what do they do? Do they abandon the ball rollback so that they can keep governing the game at the highest level? What do the equipment manufacturers do? If you're the USGA, you're going to tell the OEMs, the official, the equipment manufacturers, you're going to tell them that they have to manufacture a ball that goes shorter for certain players and longer for other players. What are they going to do? What are you going to do? Are you going to play by PGA Tour rules or USGA rules? How many USGA? There's 15 USGA championships that they host. Are they really going to ask the players, the companies, to make a ball for those 15 championships that's different than what the PGA Tour plays week in and week out? This would be a disaster. And I don't think that it would happen, in part because I think that you would play by PGA Tour rules. And I know that at your local club, the golf course you play at, they would play by PGA Tour rules, because the PGA of America runs the clubs that you play at. They have golf professionals that run the courses. They run the shops. They sell the balls. They make the rules for the tournaments. Well, they don't now. They implement the USGA rules. They are essentially the police officer of the rules at your club. Why would they sell you a golf ball that goes shorter when they could sell you a golf ball that goes farther? If the PGA Tour doesn't implement this rule and makes their own rules, the OEMs are going to continue to make golf balls that are no longer USGA conforming, but they'll be PGA Tour conforming, and they'll sell those golf balls to you, and you're going to play them because they go farther and you don't hit the ball anywhere. You can't hit the ball out of your own shadow. You don't need a rollback. A yard or two is a big deal for you. Let me tell you that. So this is ultimately a very troubling time in the game, and it is going to be fascinating to see how it all plays out. But I really wanted to highlight the importance of this because I feel so strongly about this. The game of golf is in a great place, and it's only getting better. The ball has been increasing in distance, as the USGA and R&A say, for a long time. And my question is, what's the result of that been? The result of that has been growth in the game. Distance has grown, and the game as an industry has grown. And they said that in their own press conference. Rounds are up. Everything is up in the game. Golf is on an all-time high. But we're going to roll it back. What happens when the ball goes farther? More people play. What happens when the ball goes shorter? I don't know. Why would we risk that? It seems like a crazy thing to risk. But I do want to know your thoughts on this. So leave a comment in the comment section and let me know whether you think the golf ball is going too far. Is the game one-dimensional? Do you think the game's one-dimensional? Hopefully, the information that I just shared with you says, no, the game of golf is not one-dimensional. The game of golf is in a great place, and the PGA Tour is in a great place as well. Look, this is a very popular conversation. There is a lot more to discuss. There are a lot more details. There's a lot more research to be done on this. But I heard this in the USGA press conference and I said, you know what? I gotta do a little digging. I gotta find out if the game of golf is truly one-dimensional. And everything that I've shared today says emphatically it's not. So ultimately, do we have a problem? I don't think so. Distance sells. Look at what happened earlier this week at Shinnecock Hills. What's the shot that everyone's posting on social media on Thursday? Bryson DeChambeau's 400 plus yard drive at number 12. This got a ton of attention. Yet what doesn't get any attention is 4 holes later on number 16, the 259-yard tee shot he hit. It's because of the wind. So when you see him hit one 427, that's downwind. He turns into the wind and it goes 259. Pretty strong wind, if you ask me. The game of golf is fine. Let's not touch it. That's my take. Again, I want to know yours. Leave it in the comments section. That's all we have for you here today on Greg Ducharme Golf. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate all of you who have already subscribed. If you haven't subscribed already and you want more researched opinions like this, I should say opinions based on research like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button, share it with your friends, turn on the notifications, all that good stuff is very helpful for me. I look forward to seeing all your comments on this video. Again, thanks so much for watching. We'll talk to you next time.